Hello and welcome. My name is Matthew Marquit, and in the second video in the Alpha Texture tutorial series, I want to show you guys how you can create kind of a small plant. It's a little bit more complex than our grass planes. Now our grass planes we did cut and add a little dimension to them. You could literally just leave them a plane, but if I select these objects, you can see they're just a little bit more complex. This is actually the exact same model, but one with a set of flowers and a different texture on each. Okay, so this is something that you can actually create really fast if you know what you're doing. Theoretically, you can create this in under 3 minutes. So let's go through that process real quick. Alright, so I'm going to switch over to Photoshop here, and I got this image, a royalty-free image of a fern leaf on the internet. You guys can find your own image. You can paint your own image if you want to. And then, of course, you can also find or take a picture and then cut out a leaf from an image. That's a little bit more complex and time-consuming, but those are all your different options, of course, to acquire an image like this. So this image I got, and as I said before, what we need to do first is cut it out of its background. So by default, it's just on this white background. This particular artist already did that for us and then set it up, so that's great. So I can click on using the magic wand tool, which I already have selected here, and making sure that contiguous is selected off. If you leave it on, basically what it would do is it wouldn't select areas that are encapsulated. An example would be like this right here. If I was to have contiguous on and select, you'll see how that didn't get selected. It only select things that are one continuous piece of selection. So we want to make sure that contiguous is set off, so then when we click, it will actually select inside there too. Alright, so just be mindful of what that is. So what we did was actually select the background, and since the background is pure white, it's pretty simple. The tolerance, everything's great. There's a high contrast, and that's why it worked. You might have to play around with your tolerance if the background color is not as contrasty to the image. However, in this particular case, because we did select the background, we need to change our selection and invert it. So the hotkey is Shift-Control-I, or just go up to select and inverse, and now I have the actual fern selected. From there, I can hit Control-C and Control-V to paste it in. And you'll see now, especially if I had all these layers here, that we now have a selection of that fern. So I've kind of already done that process, and you can kind of see the stuff here. I made a green background, kind of like I did with the grass, to make sure that the background is closer to the color of the fern. Here's the original fern that was cut out. I even did a hue and adjustment layer to darken it up a little bit, kind of change the color just a little bit. You can use your alpha, or not alpha, but your adjustment layers, add like an adjustment layer and change it, so don't feel like you have to be set on one thing or the other. But the great thing about using adjustment layers, of course, is it's non-destructive, so all I have to do is turn the layer on and off, or delete it completely, or even manipulate it once it's here. So we can click on this, go over to the properties, and move the slider around and update that one too. So let's undo that. Okay, so that's a great thing. Don't always feel like you have to use the default color or the way the image comes in. You change the colors to match your scene better, you know, and the color scheme that your game is having or using or whatever. Okay, so once I've done that, then I can save it out technically using an alpha and whatever. But I did do one extra thing in this one I didn't do in the other one, because there's a lot of variation in color, from like the browns and yellows to dark greens and so on. I actually duplicated the layer and then blurred it. So you see right here, I did was go to my filters, you know, choose blur, and then do like a Gaussian blur or whatever. Just blur it a little bit so it expands those colors out just a little bit, put it underneath the main layer, and now if we do have a little texture bleed, it will be closer to the colors that the model already is. So it does make it look a little blurry. If you can see, I turn it on and off, but the whole idea is that you're not actually seeing the blurry part unless there's texture bleed, and then it'll look better than a kind of a bright green compared to, say, like a dark green over here, or a brown or something. Okay, so that's just another way to do it, to make it so that the background's a little closer to your default color of your object. Obviously, you go to channels to make the alpha. I have the adjustment layer selected, so that's why it looks like there's an extra one here. If I select off of it, go to channels, you'll see that disappears. But here's my alpha. I already made it, but once again, just click new layer button right when your alpha is on, okay, and then just dump in white or whatever as your paint bucket and fill that in, right? Of course, you want to select the object over here first, so you have the right selection by holding Control and selecting the thumbnail, and then coming over here and dumping it in. Okay, Control D deselects. Now, keep in mind too, by the way, this whole RGB thing in the alpha, this is all just in Photoshop. So if I was to you know, leave it like this and save it out, it would be totally fine. Whatever you see in RGB by default, if the alpha isn't on, which is this, that's what will show up in Photoshop. So it's only Photoshop that kind of hides the RGB and shows the alpha. So I can save it like this and it'll still show up fine. I'll even prove it to you. But we'll come over here, we'll go File, Save As. I'm going to save this as a target again. and we'll call this one Fern Leaf. This was already named, so we can call it Fern Leaf, and this is a new one, so we'll just call it new, then underscore, and then just follow the same naming convention we'll do. And once again, I can't seem to spell alpha right the first time, and then do that, so alpha. All right, and then hit save. So that's saved. Once again, 32-bit. Okay, cool. So we can come back into Max and we can test how this works. So we want to add a little bit more dimension, a little bit more curve to these original planes. So I'm going to come over here, create a plane. So we'll draw out a plane here, like such. And I've kind of already chose the amount of length and width segments. In this case, I have 3 in the length and 4 in the width, right? It basically makes 12 different polys because I want to add some polys, some cuts in order to bend it in 2 different directions. Bend it this way and then bend it this way. Both of them will make a more realistic leaf, as you see over here. So let us open up the material editor by hitting M. There's already a bunch of materials here, okay, that are in the scene, but I'm going to grab a new one. So we'll go to standard here. I'm going to pull in a bitmap and we will select our new one, so our Fern Leaf new alpha. Hit open. I'm going to assign that both to the diffuse color and to the opacity. We're going to go like this, click on show in viewport. We're going to add that to the texture. You'll actually see that it's the wrong direction. We'll fix that in a moment. And then we'll go over to the texture and fix that too, where it says mono channel output, and switch it to alpha, and there you go. Now, the easiest thing to do when it's just a plane legitimately is, and we'll shut this off so we don't need it anymore, is just to scale the plane the other direction. So if I just grab the scale tool and scale the plane in the other direction like so, now we have our Fern Leaf. This one's kind of giant compared to the other one, so we'll shrink it down a little bit. You get the idea, okay? So there you go, cool. So now we got to create some of the roundness to the actual object. So to do that, we're actually going to use some modifiers. I mean, I guess you can manually just grab verts and move them around or use a soft selection, but it's just easiest to use some bend modifiers, especially if you're in Max. So come over here to our modified panel, choose the bend modifier, and then we'll just increase the angle and we'll see what happens. Now, if nothing happens, we got to choose a different axis. So between Z, Y, and X, and change angle and direction, and that's how we'll figure things out. So let's start manipulating some of these and see if we can figure out which way to go. So if I click on Y, that looks a little messed up. That's clearly what we don't want. I held an X, and there you go. So X actually looks right. You'll see a bending in one of the directions. So X we want, and maybe I'll bend it even more. So you can see that's kind of bending like that. We're making it dramatic. I mean, there's no reason to add all these cuts unless we're going to make it dramatic. Otherwise, we can just get rid of, say, the middle one because this isn't dramatic enough. And like I said, maybe we can just go a little bit more. And there you go. Cool. So I'm going to collapse this down, and we're going to put a second bend on this. So the second one, we'll go over to the modify list here, add a second bend, and we'll increase the amount. And we'll try to find the right one in this case. So we'll do Y. See if Y, and if you can't find the right one by doing this, like it gets all distorted, type in 90 in the direction, and sometimes that will help. So you see right here, this one is getting a little funky, so we'll increase the amount here. Let's check X, see if that changes. No. Z. All right, so none of these work by default. If you're getting some weird thing like this where none of them are working by default, that means there's something wrong with the mesh, so we have to reset the X form. In order to do that, you just come over here to the tools where it says reset X form, click on that. Expand this out, click on reset selected, go over here and you'll see an X form modifier on it. Now we'll just collapse it down, collapse all, yes. I can convert it to an editable poly because it defaults to a mesh. And all right, cool. So now that we have that, now I should be able to put bend on it and it should work right. So if it is kind of being funky, not giving you what you want, try it again. So we'll increase the amount here. We'll try Y. And I think this one's right, but we just have to change it to 90. So we'll set this to 90, and sure enough, it is right. It's just going up instead of down, and we'll do that until move it down so it bends down. So now it's bending in 2 different directions. All right, so you get that kind of cool effect. So we can collapse that, collapse all. Whoops, I hit preserve attributes. We don't want that. All right, cool. So now we have it set like that. All right, so how do we get this then to look like the rest of these? It's pretty simple. First, we want to move our pivot. The pivot is basically the area in which you can rotate or scale it from or move it from. You can see right here that I can rotate it up so it's a little bit higher, so it makes more sense, like it's coming out of the ground a little bit. We don't want this base to be on the same level as that. But the thing is, if we were to try to duplicate this and rotate it around a certain point, it's going to rotate around the center point, and we actually want to move our pivot. So if you don't know how to do that, pretty simple. We're actually going to come over to the hierarchy tab, which is this one right here. Select effect pivot only, and then we're just going to manually move the pivot. So we can go in here and move it. We can eyeball it, so I can just grab it like this, move it until it looks like it's close to the base of the stem. Like I said, it could be eyeballed. As long as it's fairly close, it's good enough. We can move it down a little bit, whatever, right? So it looks close enough. We don't have to spend all day on that. Cool. So we'll click on that. So shut off effect pivot only, and you'll see there's the model there. Now there's a couple ways to actually duplicate it a bunch of times. The easiest way is to just shift rotate. So you can come in here and you can go shift, hold down rotate, and rotate it till it's kind of out there, and then choose an amount that you want. So we can rotate and make like 5 copies and hit OK. And there you go. And so that actually worked pretty good. And does a pretty good job of making it look convincing. Now, of course, you can always come in here and vary these up slightly. So you can have, because that's kind of how it would work on a real plant. So we can come in here and just make some a little lower, some a little taller, you know, whatever. But you get the idea. Maybe rotate it off just a bit so it's not perfectly all the way around. Whatever. That looks a little bit more convincing. And then a second layer of them. So I'll hold down shift to make a duplicate. So we'll rotate this one up. Okay, I'm just going to make 1 copy here. So, and we'll try to straighten it out here first before we do it again. But I'm going to get these a little bit taller. So you see how that one's just a little bit taller than the other ones. And then we'll rotate it a bit so it's not, so it's in the middle of the other leaves so that we fill those in. And we can do the same thing. So hold down shift, rotate it, add 5 copies, hit OK, and there you go. All right. So that's pretty good right there. Of course, you can also grab these top ones and have them rotate at different degrees to make it more realistic and so on. We get the idea. So that's quickly kind of how you can do that. All right, now another way, of course, you can do that is if I just select everything and deselect just one of them and delete them, what we do is we can actually use the tools in the array. So if we come up to tools, you'll see that there's an array tool here. The array tool, the cool thing about the array tool is it does at least let you see how often, or it lets you see in real time kind of what's updating. So in this case, we want to rotate around the Z. Okay, so the Z is the axis is up and down, right? So if we rotate that way, so you look up here and you'll see here's your Z axis and here's your rotation. So you can actually choose an amount, right? So we can say how many we want. Or whatever, but this also tells you how many copies it's going to make and whatever. So you can click on preview and see. In this case, I'm only rotating it every 13 degrees, and it's doing 10 of them. So there's 10 of them, so it just looks a little crazy. What we want to do is we actually want to go around the full 360. So if you just type in 360, all right, so we'll just type in 360, so it goes all the way around 360, and then preview. You can have up to 10 of them within the 360. Whoops, I guess 360 put it right back on. Let's type in 180, try that, preview. Okay, so it's just kind of putting them all in the same spot at every 180. Let me see if I just leave that at 0, and we'll do a preview and a count. All right, so that's not working. So yeah, so I guess you have to try to guess what the degrees would be. Let's say maybe 30 at 10. Whoops. There we go. You kind of see like that. But you can see it's a little bit more finicky, but the cool thing is you can at least preview it. But you have to keep guessing on the angle rotations and whatever, and you get the idea. So anyways, but those are 2 different ways of doing it. I'm just going to cancel all that out. You get the concept. So there you go. So that's pretty much it. You see in here too, I also added a plant. So I have an alpha texture also with some petals for a flower. And then just like a really thin stem. This could theoretically also be an alpha texture, even though this particular one is made out of a 3D triangle object, or like a triangular cylinder. But there you go. So hopefully this video helps, and I'll see you guys in the next one.